نحمد ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Last week we started to talk about the life story of Bilal Radhi-Allahu anhu, and we talked about his mother Hamama and the narration which indicated that she was an Ajami, which does not really specify that she was an African, but that she was non-Arab. So we're going to move on from there, inshallah. I had also mentioned last week that we do know about other family members of Bilal Radhi-Allahu anhu. Among them was the sister of Bilal, Ibn-Rabah Radhi-Allahu anhu, whose name was Ghufra bint Rabah. Ghufra bint Rabah. Now we don't know whether she was a Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam or not. If she was, it would have been mentioned that she was, but there was no mention of it. So I'm guessing that she was not a Sahabiya of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But most likely she did live like Bilal radiyallahu anhu in Quraysh, in Makkah Mukarramah. So Ghufra bint Rabah radiyallahu ta'ala anha, the sister of Bilal ibn Rabah, had a mawla. Now I mentioned he had a nephew. This was a mistake on my part. It wasn't a nephew, it was a mawla, which means a freed slave of the sister of Bilal radiyallahu anhu. His name was Umar ibn Abdullah. Umar ibn Abdullah. We do need to remember that when a person becomes a mawla, even though he does not have a blood relation with the family, but he becomes like a member of the family. In fact, he even takes, in a way, that nisbah. He's called Umar ibn Abdullah Mawla Ghufra bint Rabah. That's how he's known. And likewise, we read about some Sahaba who are former slaves, like Salim. We say Salim Mawla Abi Hudhayfa. So there's that nisbah between him and Abu Hudhayfa radiyallahu anhu, who was his master at one point in time, and then he freed him. So they become like family members. So Umar ibn Abdullah was not his nephew. That's a correction I need to make. He was his the mawla of his sister, but he used to often sit in the company of the Sahabi Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, the Tabi'i Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, who was the son-in-law of Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, and was well respected among the Sahaba ridwanullahi majma'een for his ilm, his taqwa, and his zuhud. So this Umar ibn Abdullah, the mawla of Ghufra bint Rabah, would sit in the company of Sa'id ibn Musayyib. He would sit in the company of Qasim bin Muhammad. Qasim bin Muhammad rahimahullah was one of the great tabi'een like Sa'id ibn Musayyib. He was living in Medina Munawwara, and he's known as one of the a'imma of the 7 a'imma of Medina Munawwara. So there are 7 imams who are known as the greatest scholars of Medina Munawwara. Anyone who wanted to learn ilm of deen from any one of the scholars in Medina Munawwara would come to any one of these 7 people. One of them was Qasim bin Muhammad. Qasim bin Muhammad was the nephew of Aisha Siddiqa radiyallahu ta'ala anha. His father, Muhammad bin Abi Bakr, was the son of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiyallahu anhu, the youngest son, most likely. And he was raised, Qasim bin Muhammad was raised by his khala, Aisha Siddiqa radiyallahu ta'ala anha. And that's how he became a great faqih, through his khala, because Aisha Siddiqa radiyallahu anha herself was a great muhadditha, a great mufassira, a great faqiha, and she passed on her knowledge to her nephew, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed him with so much ability that he was able to fully benefit from his aunt. And so this Qasim bin Muhammad, Umar ibn Abdullah, Mawla Ghufra bint Rabah would sit in his company as well, and there were others. When did he pass away? It's mentioned that this Umar ibn Abdullah, who was a member of the family of Bilal ibn Rabah through his sister, he passed away after Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Hassan first led an uprising against Banu Umayyah. Now, who is this Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Hassan? Just remember this much, that he was from the Ahl Bayt, from the children of Hassan Radhi-Allahu anhu. And the Ahl Bayt were severely oppressed by Banu Umayyah. After the Khulafa al-Rashideen, their era ended, the Banu Umayyah took over. When Banu Umayyah took over, they started oppressing Ahl Bayt because they feared that the Ahl Bayt would rise against them and take over the Khilafah. So they would torture them, they would persecute them, they would, wherever they found them, they would arrest them and either throw them in jail or persecute them, or at least, the least, watch them carefully. Watch them very carefully. So Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Hassan was one of the Ahl Bayt who led an uprising as a result against Banu Umayyah. So they're mentioning about this Umar ibn Abdullah, that he passed away sometime after the uprising by this member of the Ahl Bayt against Banu Umayyah, which occurred in 145 Hijri. So this Umar ibn Abdullah died sometime after 145 Hijri. He's called Thiqatan Kathir al-Hadith. So he's narrated many ahadith from his teachers, which amongst whom we mentioned some of the names, Sa'id ibn Musayyib, Qasim bin Muhammad. So he was an authentic narrator. He was Thiqatan Kathir al-Hadith, narrated many ahadith from his teachers. And though most of his narrations are known as Mursal Rawayat, but he was from the family of Bilal ibn Rabah as a mawla of his sister Ghufra bint Rabah. I also mentioned another family member who was the brother of Bilal ibn Rabah. We know for sure that he was not a Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this narration about Bilal ibn Rabah's brother, his name was Abu Rawayha. Abu Rawayha. This narration is narrated by Mu'adh bin Jabal Radhi-Allahu anhu's student. His name was Amr ibn Maymun, who returned with Mu'adh bin Jabal Radhi-Allahu anhu. We talked about Mu'adh bin Jabal Radhi-Allahu anhu in Ramadan, that he went to Yemen, was sent by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as the Qadi of Yemen. During that time, many people became attached to him and became his students. One of them was Amr ibn Maymun. And Amr ibn Maymun left his city, his town, to spend the rest of his life seeking the knowledge of the deen. So he stayed with his teacher Mu'adh bin Jabal Radhi-Allahu anhu all the way to the end of Mu'adh bin Jabal Radhi-Allahu anhu's life. So he's the one who's narrating this rawaya. He said that there was a brother of Bilal Radhi-Allahu anhu. And the reason, by the way, that this Amr ibn Maymun knows so much about Bilal Radhi-Allahu anhu was because Amr ibn Maymun stayed with Mu'adh bin Jabal to the end. Mu'adh bin Jabal Radhi-Allahu anhu passed away where? In Sham. In 17 or 18 Hijri, in the plague of Amwas, 18 Hijri to be exact. And Amr ibn Maymun was with his teacher in Sham, and Bilal Radhi-Allahu anhu also was settled down in Sham. He left the city of Medina Munawwara, we'll talk about that later, and he settled down in Sham. So Amr ibn Maymun was aware of different Sahaba who were in Sham at that time, one of them being Bilal Radhi-Allahu anhu. So he mentions the story of what he knows about Bilal, that his brother, Kana yantami ila al-Arab. This gives a little bit of indication of what his brother was like. That he used to often attribute himself to be an Arab. He would call himself an Arab, even though if he was a brother of Bilal radhiyallahu anhu, that's not really possible. But he used to call himself an Arab. وَيَزَعَمُ أَنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ. And he would think that he was from among them. So he was considering himself Arab even though he was not Arab. And there's a story about him, فَخَطَبَ إِمْرَأَةً مِنَ الْعَرَبِ, that he once sent a proposal to one of the women from the Arab tribes in Sham. they found out that he is the brother of Bilal Radhi-Allahu anhu. So they said, in hadara Bilalun zawwajnak. If Bilal comes, Radhi-Allahu anhu, then we will marry you to our daughter, otherwise not. In other words, we need him as a witness. If he testifies and he stands up for you, that you are a upright person, then fine. So Bilal Radhi-Allahu anhu came, fatashahhada, he read the shahada, وقال أنا بلال ibn Rabah, and then he introduced himself. I am Bilal ibn Rabah, وهذا أخي, and this is my brother. And then what does he say? He's being very honest, blunt and honest. He says, هو امرأ سوء في الخلق في الخلق في الخلق والدين. He's a man who is of bad character and corrupt in his deen. Meaning that I don't really stand by him in terms of his being a person of high moral. I know him to be just the opposite, in fact. And he's stating very clearly that, listen, you want to marry him? Bismillah, but let me know, let me tell you what he's all about. And this is how we are required to be when someone comes to us and seeks our mashwara. Innal mustashara mu'tamin. When somebody takes mashwara from you, then you are required to give them the best advice, even though it may involve a conflict of interest. They may be asking you mashwara about your business. And what do you want to say about your business? Right? They want to invest in your business. They want to get married to somebody in your family. And you know that person is not good. But you say, he's really, oh my goodness. Another level of taqwa. You know, they don't even have taqwa. You have to be honest. So this Bilal Radhi-Allahu anhu tells you about his taqwa, his own taqwa, his own connection with Allah and his Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his integrity, his honesty. So he's saying, this is my brother, and this is what he's like. You want to get your daughter married to him? Bismillah. فَإِن شِئْتُمْ أَن تَزَوُّجُوا وَإِن شِئْتُمْ أَن تَدَعُوا فَدَعُوا. If you want, get your daughter married to him. If you want, you can leave him alone, and I have no problem with it. Meaning that don't think because he's my brother, I'm going to feel bad that you didn't get your daughter married to him. I'm telling you what he's like, and then it's your choice. And don't think I'm going to mind. So it's your choice. You want to get him married, you want to get your daughter married to him, or you want to let him go, let him on his way, that's all right with me as well. So they said, Man takunu akhahu nuzawwijuhu. If he is your brother, then we will get him married. Only for your sake. Can you imagine how much respect Bilal Radhi-Allahu anhu had amongst the people? Right? And who are these people, by the way? These people are not Habshi. They're not Africans. They're Arabs. And they're saying, only because of you, we are getting our daughter married to him. Even though we know what type of person is like, because you already informed us. If there was even an iota of inequality in Islam, this is where it would have shown up. Because we would never get our daughter to anybody we don't like. And the deepest fears that we have come out at those times. Right? We'll embrace any convert to Islam. We love everybody as Muslims. But when they come and propose to our daughter, then we only want them to get married to somebody from my background. That's it. Nobody else. I had one young brother from our community. This is what he's been complaining about. That, you know, my parents, mashallah, they go for salah 5 times. My father goes for salah 5 times. He pays zakah. He's very pious, everything. But he wants to get married to someone that's not from their background, and he's facing such a challenge that his parents are telling him that we will move back to our country, but we will not allow you to get married to that woman. They even threatened him by putting a for sale sign in front of the house. We're leaving. We're going to sell everything. We're going back home. But we're not going to allow you to get married to that woman. So this is where our suspicions and our fears, right? And the real connection that we have with Allah and His Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam comes out. Right? So, this Arab tribe is saying, we will give our daughter only because we love you. And Bilal Radhi-Allahu anhu is Habashi. And these are Arabs. If there was any inequality or racism in Islam, it would have shown in this incident. Especially after the fact that they know now that this future son-in-law is not the best of people. Bilal himself has admitted to it. He's confessed. He's not a good guy. Radhi-Allahu anhu. His kunya. Most Sahaba and Sahabiyat had kunyas. So the kunya of Bilal Radhi-Allahu anhu was Abu Abdullah. Now, that would mean that he has a son by the name of Abdullah. But we have no proof anywhere in his biography or any accounts or any narrations that he ever had any children whatsoever. There's no proof, no evidence. But still, kunya was a sign of respect. So everybody took a kunya, right? An agreement. So his kunya was Abu Abdullah. Even Aisha Siddiqa Radhi-Allahu ta'ala anha didn't have any children, but she had a kunya, Ummi Abdullah. Right? So it seems like all those who didn't have children, they became Ummi Abdullah or Abu Abdullah. So Bilal Radhi became Abu Abdullah, and Aisha Radhi-Allahu ta'ala became Ummi Abdullah Radhi-Allahu anhuma. What did he look like? So it mentions Nahifan Tuwalan. He was very thin, very tall. Ajna. Ajna means a person who's slightly curved from the shoulder area. Meaning that they lean over slightly when they stand. So this was, Bilal Radhi-Allahu anhu was extremely tall, but he was also extremely thin. And he had a slight hunch when he used to walk. Slight. Which is known as ajna. Lahu sha'arun kathir. He had a lot of hair. Khafiful a'aridain. His cheeks were very thin. So he didn't have big cheeks. Bi shamtun kathirun. And shamtun kathirun basically is another way of saying black, mixture of black and white hair. And shamtun usually means the hair on the head, though it could mean the hair on the beard. But generally it means hair on the head. So the hair on his head was like a salt and pepper. Right? So there was black and there was also white. But he would never change the color of his hair by dyeing it, as some Sahaba did. Some Sahaba would dye their hair, their beards, but Bilal Radhi-Allahu anhu would not dye his hair. Abdullah Radhi-Allahu anhu, I'm assuming it's Abdullah bin Masud Radhi-Allahu anhu, he narrates, أول من أظهر إسلامه. The first people to proclaim Islam was number 1, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Number 2, Abu Bakr Siddiq radiyallahu anhu. Number 3, Ammar radiyallahu anhu. Number 4, his mother. What was her name? Ammar bin Yasir's mother's name was Sumayya radiyallahu ta'ala anha. Number 5, Suhaib al-Rumi radiyallahu anhu. Number 6, Bilal radiyallahu anhu. And number 7, Miqdad radiyallahu anhu. Now there are other Sahaba who did accept Islam, but most of them did not pronounce it publicly because they would put their lives in grave danger. So the fact that these 7 people proclaimed Islam in the very beginning shows their intense connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and their bravery. That they're willing to put up with anything to maintain their identity as Muslims. Right? It was all about identity. They didn't have to proclaim Islam. It wasn't a fard ayn that you have to let everybody know you're Muslim. In fact, it was just the opposite. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam tried his very best to stop people from proclaiming that you're Muslim. Don't tell anybody. Keep it to yourself. He told Abu Dharr Radhi-Allahu. Abu Bakr Siddiq wanted to go to the haram, to the courtyard, and he wanted to make a public announcement that Islam is the truth and deliver a short sermon about it. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, I don't think it's a good idea. He said, Ya Rasulullah, this is the time to do it. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if you want to, go ahead. That's not my opinion. He went and he got beat up really bad. Right? So, it was not fard. So then why did they proclaim Islam? Only because their connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was so strong that they wanted to establish their identity in public, that we are Muslims, we are different from all of you. We do not believe what you believe. Even if they had not told anyone, and they never went to the temples to worship the idols, who would ever know? Who would ever care? People don't notice, right? How many people do we notice who comes to the masjid or doesn't come, right? We don't notice. The people who come frequently, we notice they're coming to the masjid. But the people who don't come, we don't notice so often because everybody's doing their own thing. But the fact that they wanted to make sure that everybody knows tells us how important it is to establish and maintain an Islamic identity. And Bilal Radhi-Allahu anhu was one of the first ones to do it after he accepted Islam. Now, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had one insurance, and so did Abu Bakr Siddiq radhiyallahu anhu, that the others did not have. Okay, and that insurance was the protection of their family. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had Banu Hashim to back him up. Abu Bakr Siddiq had Banu Taym to back him up. But these others, Ammar, Sumayya, Suhaib, Bilal, Miqdad, were not native to Makkah Mukarramah. So their tribes, their families were not located in Makkah Mukarramah. So if they did something wrong, they would be persecuted in a way nobody else would. And they were. So for them to proclaim Islam was even more dangerous than for anybody else. There's a higher level of connection here, right? And this is how we all have read and heard in bayans and talks about the persecution of Bilal radhiyallahu anhu, how he was persecuted so much. Now, it's mentioned in the riwayat by Muhammad ibn Ishaq, who's one of the greatest mu'arrikheen of Islamic history, in Islamic history. He says that فَأَلْبَسُوهُمْ أَدْرَاعَ الْحَدِيدِ, that these are the people who didn't have families and who are not native to Makkah Mukarramah, they would make them wear armor of metal. And then they would put them out in the sun midday. And you know, if you touch metal midday, what happens? When it's really, really hot, you touch at the hood of your car, what happens? You can't touch it, right? You can't even sit in your car properly. Forget about touching the hood, right? حَتَّى بَلَغَ الْجُهْدُ مِنْهُمْ مَا بَلَغَ, until some of them were pushed so far, فَأَعْطَوْهُمْ مَا سَأَلُوا, they gave to them what they asked for. What were the kuffar asking for from these believers, from these Muslimin? Why were they persecuting them? Because they wanted them to turn away from Islam. They're not asking for money. They're saying, give up your identity and your belief in Islam. So they were persecuted to such an extent that they gave them what they asked for. In other words, they sometimes uttered words of kufr, only to save their lives, to save their own lives. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed that. Mentioned in the Quran Kareem. إِلَّا مَنْ أُكْرِهَ وَقَلْبُهُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ. If there's somebody who's forced, but their heart is strong in the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're okay. That's the exception to the rule. The rule is, if you proclaim kufr and you're adamant about it and you're convinced in it from your heart, then Jahannam is your final abode. The exception to that, if somebody says something of kufr out of torture or persecution, or is forced to it in some other way, but in his heart or her heart they believe strongly in the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that rule of the final abode of Jahannam being for them doesn't apply to them. So, فَجَاء إِلَىٰ كُلِّ رَجُلٍ مِّنْهُمْ قَوْمَهُ بِأَنْطَاعِ الْأَدْمِ فِيهَا الْمَاءِ. This was one of the other forms of torture that they would use. You know, have you ever heard of waterboarding? You know what waterboarding is? No one knows waterboarding? So they would basically what they would do, they would take a leather mat. They would fill it with water. And they would have 4 people holding it from each corner. And the water would fill up in this leather mat. And then they would take the sahabi or the sahabiya and dip their head in the water. And would keep it down. And then when they would start screaming and their arms would start flailing about, and then they would pull it up and say, okay, if you proclaim kufr, then we will let you go. Otherwise, you're going back in. This is called waterboarding. It's an extreme form of torture. Right? So they would do that as well. So they use any means possible to get people to come back into kufr. The only exception to that rule, illa Bilalan. The only exception was Bilal Radhi-Allahu. They did everything they could with him. They waterboarded him. They persecuted him. They covered him with armor and left him to swelter in the sun midday. It melted his skin and his flesh. But instead of uttering words of kufr, he did just the opposite. He would just say, ahad, 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 ahad. Ajib. And the more they tortured him, the more he would say it. Ahad, ahad. This was an ajib thing about Bilal Radhi-Allahu anhu. Iman was so deeply embedded and was so absorbed in his blood, his veins, in his heart, that he didn't know how to utter anything else. And if they ever said anything to him, it's very funny, because if they ever said that, say the words of kufr, he would say, it's mentioned by Umair ibn Ishaq, كَانَ بِلَالٌ إِذَا اشْتَدُّوا عَلَيْهِ فِي الْعَذَابِ, when they used to persecute him severely, and they would get tired, and he would say, ahad, ahad. They would say to him, قُلْ كَمَا نَقُولُ, say what we say. And he says, إِنَّ لِسَانِي لَا يُحْسِنُهُ, I don't know how to say it. So they would say, okay, say this. He said, I don't know how to say it. You can say ahad, ahad, but you can't say this. He said, I don't know how to say it. This was the excuse. He said, say this. Say Lat and Uzza is your God, and you worship them. And he said, I don't know how to say that. Ajib. Why do you think Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam chose him as the mu'adhin, who forever, he was known as Sayyidul Mu'adhineen, the leader of all the mu'adhineen, the first mu'adhin of Islam. And throughout his life, through the prophetic era, not after, but throughout the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's calling out Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar 5 times a day, to the extent that he's also waking Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam up for Salatul Fajr. And when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was praying tahajjud the whole night, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam once didn't, couldn't wake up, and he said, As-salatu khayrun min an-nawm. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam really liked that, and he said, what is it you just said? He said, As-salatu khayrun min an-nawm. He said, include that in the Fajr adhan. As-salatu khayrun min an-nawm. That's a sunnah of Bilal Radhi-Allahu anhu. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the tawfiq to always do the dhikr of Allah, not quietly, loudly, through the adhan, throughout Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time. No one else was allowed to take that position from him. Except here and there were occasions where it happened, but mostly whether it was safar or hadar. Because Bilal radiyallahu anhu said, oh ahad, 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 Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that this person loves me so much, I'm going to make sure he continues to say Allahu Akbar, and praise me in public, just like he did when he was persecuted in Islam in the beginning, for the rest of his life. Allahu Akbar. The biggest ni'mah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to Bilal radiyallahu anhu. We're going to talk about his virtues inshallah in the next few weeks. We'll stop here and we'll continue this inshallah next week. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين جزاكم الله خير الجزاء.